I've seen things that nightmares are made of. Do you believe in ghosts?
The story of SIGH actually goes back 49 years. But let's go back to 2000, back to a studio in New Middletown, Indiana called Mythmaker Studios Incorporated. The origin of SIGH starts out as the Southern Indiana Ghost Hunter. That was me back in 1974, back when I couldn't figure out the difference between what was real and what's paranormal. And so I started studying over the years. And with some help of my friends, we went out and did investigations on our own, which we really didn't know that much, but we learned some over the years. So here is the beginning of SIGH in 2000 with the group that you know of as today. Back in early 2000, when the band craze was finally starting to calm down a little bit, and we had a little bit of a break from resting up from all this era, my wife Linda and I decided, well, maybe let's try something different. Let's try some touring of the United States. And of course, that didn't go quite as well as we planned, because my wife knew that I was interested in the paranormal stuff, and she decided, let's go to the Myrtles Plantation. We booked the most haunted room at the Myrtles Plantation, and as the way the contract went, we had to sign a waiver when we went in. There was no phones, there was no electric television or anything else. It was just us at the plantation. And when we got there, we were all by ourselves, with the exception of when we first pulled up and we were late. I seen a light on in the front room. So I went to the front door, I rang the door, thought I saw somebody get up off of a couch and head toward the hallway, but nobody came to the hallway. Only till the next morning did we find out that there was nobody in the house. It was just us. And the front room where I seen the light and the figure walk across, there was no electric to the house. All of this kind of excited me. As to say, it brought back memories of the old days when me and my buddies would go out and try to do things on our own. So at this point on, came to the conclusion to me that I was going to go ahead and start the Southern Indiana Ghost Hunters, a new group that was going around to discover what was going on around the country and in Southern Indiana. This new group was going to be a scientific group. It was going to be more than just proving that hauntings exist. It was going to check out some of the interesting hauntings and see what was going on at these places, but at the same time, we were also going to seek out what may be causing the haunting other than ghosts themselves. Welcome to New Middletown, Indiana. This is the birthplace of SIGH, the Southern Indiana Ghost Hunters. This also used to be a studio, Mythmaker Studios Incorporated, when we first started out. I came across a collection of a lot of tapes from the old days which have never been viewed, never really been looked at. And they cover a whole career, the beginning career of the Southern Indiana Ghost Hunters. So this being the story of SIGH, as you know them, we'll begin with one of the places that we first went to as we started at SIGH, with the Eubanks house. The Eubanks investigation is one of the first investigations that SIGH did when we started out with this version of SIGH, and it began in 2006 and ended in about 2010. The Eubanks is an investigation that we usually don't talk about too much, and for the reason why you'll see later when I explain the rest of the story. It all started in 2006 with a phone call from Bill Eubanks, who claimed to me that he had a spirit in his house that would torment him constantly. And we didn't know how far this was going to go until we began our investigation. Little did we know, by the end of this investigation, where things were really going to lead to. The Eubanks case was a very devastating case for us, as it went in a lot of different directions. A lot of directions where we didn't know what was real and what wasn't real. You see, Eubanks himself told us the story, but the story changed all the time. So we didn't know exactly what we were chasing when we were there. I'll give you a few emphases on that here in just a minute. We got one picture from the first investigation of the Eubanks that we couldn't explain. And if you look at it, on the right-hand side of the picture toward the top, it seems to be a skull that wasn't there before. And in future pictures, it wasn't there again. So take a look at it and see what you think. Throughout the years, most electronics that were used in a Eubanks investigation would frequently fail, along with other parts of the electric of the house. We didn't know what this was coming from, but it seemed to be centered around the kitchen area. And one evening when I was at home, I got a phone call from Bill that his son had captured a picture of something in the kitchen area that we dubbed as the energy eater. Bill sent us down to his basement on the second time we went there, claiming that there was this old well that was covered up down there, and he felt that the presence that was bothering him was coming from that well. So he wanted us to unlock the well. Well, in order to do that, we first approached him with there's certain rules and stuff to opening up wells, or we would need some guidance on if we could do it or not. But we went along anyway, and Bill said everything was fine. Everything checked out with the state. Go ahead and open it up. So we go down, and there's this little round structure that's sitting in the middle of the floor. And it's got this wooden lid across the top of it. I mean, it looked very strange. It stood about 3 foot tall, and it's about 3 foot around. And he claimed it was a well. So we pried away at the lid. Finally got the lid off of it, and there was nothing there. It was just concrete underneath, just like the rest of the floor. So we told him, this is not a well. And he said, well, something's going on down there because something's digging holes underneath the house. It looks like caves. So we went back down, and we found these holes. They were hand dug by somebody. We don't know by who or where they even went to. But they went deep underneath the house. And then when we were down there doing our investigation, we noticed something in one particular area over by the well, that he used to call it.
it seemed like it was getting hotter. And it just kept warming up and warming up. And we noticed that there was a hot water heater sitting there. And so I went over to check the hot water heater. The hot water heater was about to blow up. The cap that lets off the steam wasn't working, and somebody turned that hot water heater all the way up. Now Bill is a crippled man. He says he can't make it down those stairs. But somebody had turned that hot water heater all the way up. And I was thinking it was so we'd be down there and it'd explode on us.
It should be noted that at this time, any investigation that we did at the Eubanks house, something bad would seem to follow us from the house. At one time, my house was infected with snakes. There was another time where vehicles would break down, people would have bad times with their family. The Eubanks seemed to be adding up to something a little bit more than we were prepared to deal with. Bill also sent me another picture later on down the road that he captured from his bedroom that was looking out into the foyer. Now this was a disturbing picture because he was talking about this entity that would come and visit him at night. It looked like something like a female that would look at him through his mirror. Take a look at these pictures and see what you think.
Upon further investigation of the basement, we had found that what he claimed to be a well kind of looked like an altar. And we had questioned him about any black magic going on in the house. And at first he said no. But then he had came across and told us an old story where he was a SEAL, actually. He was a Navy SEAL. And he told us about being on this island with his friends. And when they were on this island, they were there doing their Navy SEAL stuff. But they were also Satanists. And he joined the Satanist group. And then he started presenting us with swords and stuff like that that he brought back with him from the islands. And we noticed on these swords, when we looked at them, there was dried blood on the tips of the swords. So I asked him about the blood. I said, "What's this?" And he said, "Well, it's not worth keeping if you don't have something to remember by." That clicked me as very strange. Over the years, Bill told us about his son that was in the house. We actually had an investigation set up to go investigate his house one evening, and we was told to hold off. And we didn't know why we were told to hold off. He just said, "You need to hold off right now, I'll tell you later." Well, he called me back in a couple of days. And he told me, he said, "We couldn't have it because my son committed suicide." Now, that struck us as pretty odd, that his son committed suicide, but he did it with one of Bill's guns. And Bill kept the gun. And I asked him, I said, "What are you doing keeping the gun?" And he said, "Why not keep it?" He kept it locked in a case underneath his bed. And when we went down there to do the investigation afterwards, I seen the case underneath his bed. And at one time, while we were filming in their bedroom, I heard a click. I looked down, and the case, one of the handles on the case was released. And so I said in this EVP section, we did an EVP, and I asked what was under the bed. I didn't get anything. I reached under the bed, I said, what would happen if I looked inside this case? Nothing. So I clicked the other latch on it. I opened up the case. And as soon as I opened up the case, we received this.
We had all rode together that night in Michael Smith's van. And on our way back from the investigation, we started talking about the EVP that we captured. And we would go through all the events of the evening. But every time we would come up and start talking about the EVP that we captured and the gun in the case, the van would die on the road and wouldn't start for a couple minutes later. Then it would kick up and start going again. And so we continued to talk about the EVP, and every time we brought up the EVP, the car would quit. Several years down the road from the investigation, a friend of mine named Robbie McIntosh and I were eating lunch one day in his van, which we had the engine running and the heater was on. And we would start talking about some old times, and I started telling him about the EVP that we captured at Eubanks. And as soon as I started talking to him about it, the van shut off. The heat, everything was gone. And it wasn't like it died, it just quit all of a sudden. Then, in about a minute or so, it started going again. And it's not like the engine started itself. It's just like it continued to run like nothing had ever happened.
The thing of a curse is an ordinary term that implements that something bad's going to happen to somebody if they do this, if they do that. But a curse doesn't have any power to it, only then the words itself and how you pay attention to these words. I mean, if somebody says you're divinely cursed, well, God doesn't need a curse to make things happen. He does things on his own. But a curse by a person or any entity out here in this world is useless unless you pay attention to the words. Now we're moving on to the final chapter of the Eubanks house. And by the final chapter, I mean that a lot of our footage has been lost over the years. The Eubanks house happened so many years ago, and so many twists took place during this investigation. And talking about the curse, which it obviously seemed like we were in some sort of a curse with the Eubanks house, we decided that maybe we could do an exorcism on the house. We weren't qualified to do it ourselves. So we called in a group of specialists, which I'm not going to mention their names. But along with the specialists that came in with the paranormal clergy was a media, a type of media, something we really didn't want to be a part of, and we weren't really included on it. We came back to the house with this media. It was me and the group at that time, which was Michael Smith, Tracy Spires, and Michael's wife. And we sat back in the background as they did the investigation. And then they did their exorcism of the house. And when the exorcism was over, we were told to leave the house. It had to be left for a period of 48 hours before we could return and receive our equipment. When we came back to the house, everybody was immediately surprised. The house seemed clean. The Eubanks were happier. They thanked the paranormal clergy. We thanked them, thinking that this case was ended. And, like I said, everything seemed very clean. But a lot had happened at the Eubanks house. So much had happened, and so much film footage and everything that we took from before no longer existed. It was either destroyed or it didn't work at all. I will tell you an interesting story, though. While the paranormal clergy was busy doing their work in the Eubanks house, we were in a back room in the bedroom where the gun was and where so many things had taken place. And at one point during the exorcism, the radio turned on in the room by itself, and it turned on full blast. And so I was anxious with Michael, and I told him, I said, we got to get that radio off, which we eventually did. And a few other strange things happened in the house. But the Eubanks case is such a long case. It's the longest that SIGH had ever witnessed in our life. And there's so many things that I could bring up that I would fill up an entire other video. But for now, this is just the beginning of the story of SIGH. If you'd like to read more about the Eubanks case, you can in a book that was titled after us, The Southern Indiana Ghost Hunter Chronicles. This is volume 1. Eubanks is in this book. Thank you for watching. We'll talk at you soon.